Please rise for the pledge of allegiance. Councilwoman Law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. Look up beneath the clouds, not with heads down, but with only a limited view of the pavement. Let us not forget that we are accountable today, that we have been given responsibilities to represent the whole population, not just a few. Teach us to trust in one another and take tasks seriously. Help us to remember there are so many differences of ideas and try to blend our thoughts to bring all together. We in our position have had the power to make a difference. We pray that the difference we make is good and honest. We ask this in the name of our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Brenneman?
Here.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Here.
Mrs. Fatica?
Here.
Dr. Faust?
Here.
Mr. Leone?
Here.
Mrs. Law?
Here.
Chairman Horton?
Here. There no one called ahead, but is there anyone here from the public who wishes to be heard? Seeing none.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the budget public hearing minutes and the regular minutes of the regular meeting.
I'll second his motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Mr. Leone and Dr. Faust. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatica?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes. Was that both minutes you did, or just the one? Was that both minutes?
Both
you
of them,
did?
yes.
Okay. There's no report from the county executive tonight. Dr. Faust, would you give the finance report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Thursday, council met as the Finance Committee and agreed to put the following items on tonight's agenda. There was no old business to revisit, so under new business, ordinances number 133 through and including ordinance 138. We further agreed to move ordinances 133, 34, and then ultimately tonight in caucus 136 to second readings. I don't think we moved 137, did we? Carol has a note here, but I don't remember that conversation. But we could figure that out later. And then furthermore, resolutions 53, 54, 55, 56, and 57, I'm sorry. Also the sale of parcels from repository for unsold properties. And then furthermore, under old business is ordinance number 115 through and including ordinances number 132. Those are all the budget ordinances that will be on our agenda tonight. That's the end of the report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Faust. Personnel, Mr. Brenneman.
Mr. Chair, the Personnel Committee met immediately following the Finance Committee, and we discussed under old business ordinances number 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, and 114. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Councilman DiMatteo, you have a report?
Mr. Chairman, I'll reserve my remarks until later, till we reach that point of the budget. Thank you.
Great. Item 7, old business.
Mr. Chairman, could we recess to just
finish our
finalize our
budget.
preparations for the budget, then come back out and begin voting?
Yes, we can.
I agree.
We'll recess and do as Dr. Faustus indicated. Thank you. Okay, let's go back in session. Item 7, old business.
Mr. Chair, move to table items A through F under old business.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Brenneman, seconded by Councilman Leone. Any discussion? Roll call, Mr. Smith?
On tabling items A through F, Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatica?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Move to approve tonight's agenda to make ordinances number 133, 34, and 36 second readings, and also to add items Double E, which is ordinance 139 regarding the FLSA provisions. Item double F, which will be 3 appointments to the EMTA. Representing District 1 would be Julie Minnick. Representing District 3 would be Charlene Kerr, and representing District 7 would be Howard Fair. And also adding item GG, which is Resolution 58 regarding the support of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe opposition to the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Leon. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On amending the agenda, Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item 8, new business, item A. Second reading of ordinance number 133, 2016, in title only, please, Mr. Smith.
A second reading of ordinance number 133, 2016, 36, 2016 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $13,975 for county council professional fees.
So moved. Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Leon. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On ordinance 133, Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon.
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 134, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 134, 2016, 37th, 2016 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $24,670 for presidential election expenditures and voter registration and conduct of elections.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Leon. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
On ordinance 134, Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item C,
Thank you.
first reading of ordinance number 135, in title only.
A first reading of ordinance number 135, 2016, amending the Erie County Affordable Housing Fund ordinance.
Item D, second reading of ordinance number 136, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 136, 2016, amendment to the Administrative Code, Article 2, Section 541E, Erie County Metropolitan Transit Authority.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Considering that the bulk of the appointments will come from the mayor and therefore probably reside in those appointments would reside in the city of Erie, I think it's imperative that we try to have each area of the county represented. This gets to that, and as many have expressed exhaustion with this issue, I think this will finally put the MTA behind us for a while, so I would hope people would support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faust. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
On ordinance 136, Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item E, first reading of ordinance number 137, 2016, in title only, please.
A first reading of ordinance number 137, 2016, 38th, 2016 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $24,500, a grant for an energy audit.
Thank you. Item F, first reading of ordinance number 138, 2016, in title only, please.
A first reading of ordinance number 138, 2016, 39th, 2016 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $60,000 and new line item for community college study.
Item G, Possible adoption of resolution number 53.
Resolution number 53, 2016, resolution approving the fiscal year 2016 Community Development Block Grant application and authorizing its submission to the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Leon and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On Resolution 53, Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
yes,
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leon?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
yes,
Chairman Horton?
Yes. Item H.
Thank you.
Possible adoption of resolution number 54, 2016.
Resolution number 54, 2016, resolution adopting a Community Development Block Grant, CDBG program, anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan for the County of Erie and the County of Erie on behalf of Edinburgh Borough, Girard Township, McCain Township, and Northeast Borough. There we
I'll
are.
make a motion on that resolution.
And I'll second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Brenneman and Councilman Person Leon. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On Resolution 54, Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
yes,
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Possible adoption of resolution number 55, 2016, in title only.
Resolution number 55, 2016, resolution adopting a Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, program, Minority and Women Business Enterprise Plan for the County of Erie and the County of Erie on behalf of Edinburgh Borough, Girard Township, McCain Township, and Northeast Borough.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilperson Faust and Leon. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, move to amend the plan to add state-issued photo ID as a form of verification on page 3 under paragraph 13.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded for the amendment. Is there any discussion? Roll call on the amendment, please.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
yes,
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Possible adoption of resolution number 55, in title only.
So we're going to vote on 55 as amended. Yes, sir?
Yes.
Okay. On amendment resolution 55, Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
yes,
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item J, possible adoption of resolution number 56, 2016, please.
Resolution 56, 2016, appointment of firm to perform comprehensive single audit for Erie County and related funds for the year ending December 31, 2016.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman DiMatteo and Leon. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On Resolution 56, Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
yes,
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item K, possible adoption of resolution number 57, 2016, please.
Resolution 57, 2016, approving the Human Relations Commission selection for office investigator.
So moved.
second,
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Law. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
On Resolution 57, Mrs. Law,
yes,
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, move to approve the sale of parcels from repository for unsold properties according to the index numbers listed in our agenda tonight.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilperson Fatika. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On the approval of sale of parcels, Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna move into the budget portion under item 7, old business. Items M, second reading of ordinance number 115, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 115, 2016, 2017 debt service fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's been
So much
properly
for-
moved
Sorry
and
about
seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Leon. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On ordinance 115, Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 116, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 116, 2016, 2017 employee fringe benefit fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On ordinance 116, Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of
Thank you.
ordinance number 117, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 117 of 2016, 2017 Health Choices Fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir?
move to amend this ordinance with action sheets number 1, 2, 3, and 3A.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by the same two council people to amend. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. So we're going to vote on the second reading of ordinance number 117, 2016. Roll call, please.
No changes
As
in the cover
amended.
sheet.
There are no changes to the cover sheet, is that right? Okay. On ordinance 117 as amended then, Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 118, 2016, in title only, please, Mr. Smith.
A second reading of ordinance number 118 of 2016, 2017 Mental Health Intellectual Disabilities Fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance 118 with action sheets number 1 through 5.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by the same two for the amendment. Any discussion? Roll call, please, on the amendment.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 118. Roll call, please.
On 118 as amended, Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 119, 2016, the title only, please.
119 was stuck behind.
oh, thank you. A second reading of ordinance number 119 of 2016, 2017 Drug and Alcohol Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second?
Properly moved and seconded by Faust and Councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to amend ordinance 119 with action sheets number 1 and 2.
Mr. Chairman, I second that motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded by the same two councilpersons. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On the amendment, Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 119 as amended. Roll call, please.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 120, 2016, in title only, please.
a second reading of ordinance number 120, 2016, 2017 Children and Youth Services Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second?
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust, seconded by Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to approve ordinance number 120 with action sheets number 1, 2, 3, and 3A, and then action sheets 4 through 17.
Second?
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call as amended.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Actually, I said as amendment, but that was the vote on the amendment. And
Yes, sir.
so we'll do second reading of ordinance 120 as amended. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Oh, you need to change, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Move to amend the the cover sheet with the following figure.
71,040,816.
I second that motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
on the amendment to the face sheet, Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just real quick, Mr. Maloney, that was 71,048,16? Okay, thank you.
Second reading of ordinance number 120 as amended. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
on the ordinance as amended, Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 121, 2016. Please, Mr. Smith, in title only.
a second reading of ordinance number 121 of 2016, 2017 Domestic Relations Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second?
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance number 121 with action sheets 1 through 6.
Second?
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion on the amendment? Roll call, please, on the amendment.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to further amend this ordinance, or the cover sheet, I should say anyway, with the following figure.
$5,212,822.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faustin and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On the amendment to the face sheet, Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 121 as amended. Please, Mr. Smith. Roll
120.
call.
120.
Is that 120? Yeah.
No, you're correct, 121.
121, that's correct.
I'm
Okay.
steering you wrong, Mr. Chair.
No, we'll get through it. It's been a long evening.
On
Second
121 is amended, I'm sorry, sir.
That's okay.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 122 in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 122, 2016, 2017 Planning Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance number 122 with action sheets 1 through 5.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman on the amendment. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith, on the amendment.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend the cover sheet with the following figure.
$5,163,324.
I second that motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion? Hearing none, second reading of ordinance number 122 as amended. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes,
That was on the amendment.
that was on the amendment.
Okay.
Right. Mhm. So second reading of ordinance
Yes.
number 122 as amended. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
On the final amendments, Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item U, second reading of ordinance number 123, 2016 in title only, please, sir.
A second reading of ordinance number 123, 2016, 2017 Library Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance number 123 with action sheets 1 through 10.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by the previous council people listed. Any discussion? Roll call, please, on the amendment.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend the cover sheet with the following figure.
$6,882,950.
I second that motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman to reflect the amended face sheet. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment? Or is
Mrs.
that-
Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 123, 2016, as amended, sir. Roll call, please.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes.
Move to amend the face cover sheet with this figure.
$6,508,941.
Second.
a second reading of ordinance number 124 of 2016, 2017 Public Health Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance number 124 with action sheets 1 through 4 and 4A, and action sheets 5 through 12.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend the cover sheet with the following figure.
$6,508,941.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion on the amendment? Roll call, please, as amended. Mr.
Mrs. Law, thank you. Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 124, 2016, as amended. Roll call, please.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 125, 2016, in title only.
A second reading of ordinance number 125, 2016, 2017 Public Safety Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Well, let me get them on it.
Okay.
Move to amend ordinance number 125 with action sheets 1 through 4, 4A, and action sheets 5 through 9.
Second.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to separate action sheet number 9. Vote for all, but number 9, we'll vote 9 separate.
Been properly moved and seconded, the amendment. Roll call on the amendment, Mr. Smith?
On the motion to amend with action sheets 1 through 8, Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes.
I'd like to introduce number 9. This actually reduces the funding for the pay for the, what is it, the F plan that we call it?
Yeah.
And I'll second that.
Thank you.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Leone and Brenneman on the added amendment to add item 9. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
In reviewing this plan, I think that it addresses something that has been a problem with retaining and providing the services needed at a quality level for the public safety in Erie County. And I believe that with the extensive training that's necessary for both the first a call taker and then to increase the level so that people can be dispatchers in fire and medical as well as law enforcement, I believe that this plan is something that's going to work effectively.
Okay. Okay, I believe that we're on the second reading for the amendment, adding
Item 9.
on the action sheet, if there's no further.
Mr. Chair, could I just want one
Yes.
clarification. If you want to approve the reduction, you would vote yes here. I just want to make sure everybody's certain how they're
All right.
voting.
Mr. Chair.
Say that again?
A yes vote would approve the reduction.
Would approve.
Under
That
item
was-
9.
Okay.
There was an increase in the budget, this would approve the reduction.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
About this time last year, shortly thereafter the budget, I was the one who wrote the resolution about this pay plan to move things forward. I think most everyone on council would agree that it's been a long time coming. As we stand here, though, we stand with a portion of this. Now, some people have said, well, we can vote this in and just do this part. If we do this part, I think it gives everyone at the county the air that the whole pay plan will be implemented as it's been presented. As the pay plan has been presented as a whole to all of council and the implementation thereof was only about 2 weeks ago. We really haven't had much time amongst ourselves to discuss it and vet it. I think there are some possibilities as to how the plan can be implemented, okay? Other than what the gentleman who did the plan, Mr. Felice, presented to us, as well as what we got from the county executive. Again, I think there's much discussion here that needs to take place before we vote this in. I agree wholeheartedly with Kathy that I think the people at Public Safety do need a raise. Unfortunately, at this time, I can't vote yes on this because, or I should say, I can't put this in place just yet until I know how the whole plan will be implemented. Once I know how that will be implemented, I think we can move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other discussion on the amendment of adding item 9? If being none, we have roll call on the amendment for item 9, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Fatika
For clarification, a yes keeps this,
keeps the reduction.
keeps
No.
the reduction. A
For
no,
clarification,
Yes.
a yes means we approve the amendment to add, to separate.
To take out
so
the increase.
I just wanted to make sure.
Reduces the raises to 3%.
All right. So I would be voting no.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
I guess yes at the time.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Chairman Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, move to amend the face sheet with the following figure.
$8,127,860.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any further discussion? Roll call on the, amended, on ordinance number 125 as amended.
On the face sheet amendment for ordinance 125, Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes,
Chairman Horton,
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 125, 2016 as amended, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mr. Fatika, I'm sorry, Mrs. Fatika, excuse me,
yes,
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
I don't know where that came from.
Second reading of ordinance number 126, 2016, in title only, please, Mr. Smith.
A second reading of ordinance number 126, 2016, 2017 gaming fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance number 126 with action sheets 1 through 4.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment please, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Joe, is there a change here? Mr. Chairman, move to amend the face sheet with the following figure.
$12,483,910.
I second that motion.
It's been properly moved and seconded to amend the face sheet by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. If there's no discussion, may I have the roll call, please?
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 126, 2016, as amended.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 127, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 127, 2016, 2017 Liquid Fuels Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion?
No, we're good. I'm sorry,
We're
Mr. Chairman.
good. We're good. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. May I please have the second reading of ordinance number 128, 2016, in title only, please, sir?
A second reading of ordinance number 128, 2016, 2017 Pleasant Ridge Manor Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilperson Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to amend with action sheets 1 and 2.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment, please, Mr. Smith?
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 128, 2016, as amended. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 129, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 129, 2016, 2017 Pleasant Ridge Manor Depreciation Reserve Fund Budget.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by Councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
On ordinance 129, Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes. Don't be sorry.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item double B, second reading of ordinance number 130, 2016, in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 130, 2016, 2017 Erie County Care Management Budget.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to amend ordinance number 130 with action sheets 1 through 3.
Second. It's
been properly moved and seconded to the amendment of ordinance number 130 by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes. We're reading the second reading of ordinance number 130. We're voting as amended. Mr. Smith, can you do the roll call, please?
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes. Okay, Dr. Leon, I like saying that.
I asked to pull action sheet 62 in the general fund.
Okay. Mr. Leon has requested that we pull action sheet number 63 from the general fund. May I have the second reading of ordinance number 131, 2016, entitled only, please, sir?
A second reading of ordinance number 131, 2016, 2017 general fund budget.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Move to amend ordinance number 131 with action sheets 1 through 58.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Faust and Brenneman on the amendment. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just very quickly, was there a 4A in here at all? I didn't make a note of it. Okay, so I apologize. If I could amend my motion to include 4A in addition to 1 through 58.
As do I, Mr. Chair.
The necessary corrections have been made to the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment to ordinance number 131? Seeing none, will we have the roll call on the amendment, Mr. Smith?
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, move to amend ordinance number 131 with action sheet number 59.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call on the amendment?
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
move to amend ordinance number 131 with action sheet number 60.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Seeing no discussion, roll call on the amendment?
On action sheet 60, Mr. Leone?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question?
Sure, sir.
I believe we want to keep this funding in, correct? So we don't want to approve this particular, if we're so inclined anyway. Yeah. All right, so I guess to give everybody their equal due, even though I'm gonna vote in the. Yeah, I would ask that we pull it. I think most of us want to keep that funding in. And if there's somebody who wants to object and vote on it, we could do that, but I would say pull it.
What is that?
Oh, that's fine. Item 61.
If we pull that ordinance, the decrease will be
We'll have to vote on it.
eliminated. Okay? I think that's what everybody wanted anyway. So with that, if there's no objection, moving to amend ordinance number I'm sorry, yeah, ordinance number 131 with action sheet number 62.
Second?
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just very quickly, because of the nature of my job at Mercyhurst, I place a lot of interns with a lot of different departments in the courthouse. They all work very hard. They're all vitally needed by those particular departments, and none of them get paid. I really don't think it's appropriate to be paying an intern in the county executive's office, especially after we've just eliminated a position. So I'll be voting no to provide this intern, paid intern. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith, on ordinance number 131.
On action sheet 62, Mrs. Law,
No.
Mr. Brenneman,
No.
Mr. DiMatteo,
No.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
No?
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to amend ordinance number 131 with action sheet number 64.
Second?
Been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust, Councilman Brenneman.
What's that?
Oh, we haven't gotten anything. We're gonna come back to that,
Oh.
right?
Okay, I'm sorry, this is the, go ahead, yes, go ahead.
The domestic relations is a decrease of $89. Children and youth is a decrease of $8,179. Planning is a decrease of $24,832. Library fund is an increase of $6,251. Health department is a decrease of $24,331. Public safety is an increase of $78,455. So your increased total is $84,736. Your decreased total $57,431.
Okay, move to amend ordinance number 131 with action sheet number 64 with the figures Mr. Maloney just provided us.
Second?
Been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Seeing no discussion, roll call, please, on the amendment.
Mr.
On
Brennan?
the action sheet.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I suggest we recess to figure out what we want to do next regarding the tax levy?
Can we complete the,
You want to do the other parts of the agenda?
Let's
Fine
do
with me,
the-
sure.
if you don't mind?
No. So-
Item E, or?
So item EE, ordinance number 139, 2016, in title only, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, do we need to vote on 131 as amended? Not yet?
We-
Not yet, okay. Thank you.
Looking for a second.
Okay. Ordinance number 139, 2016, in title only, please.
Ordinance number 139, 2016, Fair Labor Standard Act, creation of line items for overtime in various departments.
So moved.
Second?
Been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Well, I had thought it was a first reading at first, but I'm not quite as sure now as I was then.
Oh, wait a minute, you're correct, Mr. Smith.
What's that?
I think we want to move this to a second reading, so,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I move to make ordinance number 139 a second reading. That's my fault, I should have brought that up
And
at the beginning.
I'm sorry.
And I'll still vote yes.
Okay, wait a minute, okay, so, ordinance number 139, it's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Brenneman, to amend it to a second reading.
Yes, sir.
I
Okay,
think we'd agree to that.
yeah, roll call, please.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leon?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 139 in title only, please.
A second reading of ordinance number 139, 2016, Fair Labor Standards Act, creation of line items for overtime in various departments.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman. No discussion, seeing none. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leon?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to waive the appropriate parts of the administrative code and approve Julie Minnick to the EMTA Authority representing District 1, Charlene Kerr representing District 3 to the EMTA Board, and representing District 7, Howard Fair.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust. Properly moved by Dr. Faust, seconded by Councilwoman Law. Okay, we better wrap this up.
We'll get there. We haven't even gotten to the hard part yet. That's
Any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
On the appointments, Dr. Faust?
yes.
Mr. Leon?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Chairman Horton?
Yes. Item GG, resolution on Standing Rock.
Sure.
Resolution number 58, 2016, in support of Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's opposition to Dakota Access Pipeline.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilwoman Fatika, seconded by Councilwoman Law. Oh, God.
Or Jay. Or me.
I need a Snickers. It's been properly moved and seconded by councilpersons Fatika and Brenneman. Seeing no discussion, roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Leon?
Yes.
Mrs. Law?
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman?
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo?
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika?
Yes.
Dr. Faust?
Yes.
Mr. Leon? I'm sorry. I already voted. Yes, sir.
Only get the vote one time.
Yes.
You're a yes, sir. All right. Mr. Horton?
Yes.
When Doug gets
And we're going to recess and deal with item DG on the agenda. We'll retire in caucus. Let's get started. We're back in session and we'll resume on item double D.
Actually, we're still on CC, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
absolutely.
Move to amend ordinance number 131 with action sheet number 65, which increases real estate revenues by $3,339,825, which would reflect an increase in the millage of 0.25 mils.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Dr. Faust and Councilman Brenneman.
Mr. Chairman, just very quickly, that helps eliminate the use of the fund balance and also, cover the positions that we're going to have coming over in public safety when Mill Creek fully comes on board. And this just puts us in a better position, not the deficit spend, year after year. We've had a good mix of doing both, of using fund balance when we feel we can get through, and nobody likes to raise taxes, but we try to do it where it's kept to a minimum, and it's never easy, but again, I think this year it'll be at least to a minimum where it will not be as painful as it might be otherwise. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
One of the things you forgot to mention was the fact that you have a bond issue that you've got to cover.
For the radio project,
Yeah,
yes, correct.
That's really part
that's-
of the
that's-
biggest portion of it.
Right, thank you very much.
Well, it's been properly moved and seconded for the amendment. No discussion, roll call on the amendment on the item of action sheet 65 added.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo,
No.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item nope, actually,
As amended.
second reading of ordinance number 131 as amended.
Cover sheet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, move to amend the cover sheet by the figure Mr. Maloney will give us?
$98,782,795.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Councilman Brenneman. And seeing no discussion, roll call on the amendment.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 131 as amended. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. DiMatteo,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Item DD, second reading of ordinance number 132. Mr. Smith, in title only, please.
Second reading of ordinance number 132, 2016, 2017 real estate tax levy.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Councilman Brenneman.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to set the tax levy, to 5.41 mils.
5.41, you're right.
Yeah, okay.
Second.
5.41 mils, Mr. Chairman. That reflects the increase of .25.
It's been properly moved and seconded by Councilman Faust and Councilman Brenneman. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just very quickly, also, again, nobody wants to raise taxes or wish we had to do that, but a measure I think council took in this particular budget, which we should see some additional savings through the year, is that whenever we have an open position, we're going to, by ordinance, we've ruled that that's going to be open for 60 days, and that should help control of the increase of the budget as well over the next 12 months.
Duly noted. Seeing no further discussion, roll call on the, amendment?
To the face, yes, sir.
Roll call on the amendment, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
No.
Chairman Horton.
Yes. Second reading of ordinance number 132. Roll call, please, Mr. Smith, as amended.
Dr. Faust,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Brenneman,
Yes.
Mr. DiMatteo.
No.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Chairman Horton.
Yes.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.